Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're taking a closer look, a real deep dive, into the 14K Triad, a pretty major name in organized crime, globally speaking.
Definitely a big one.
And this one's for you, our listener. We're working directly from the source material. You sent us some really detailed articles on their history, their, you know, criminal stuff, structure, how they operate worldwide.
Yeah, quite a bit of material to go through.
So our mission here is basically to pull out the key bits, the most interesting insights about the 14K, give you a clear picture of their story, their impact, without drowning you in details.
Sounds good. It's a complex story, for sure.
Okay, let's get into it. Where does the story of the 14K even begin?
Well, it goes surprisingly far back. The sources put the founding in 1945, right after World War II, in Guangzhou, China.
1945? Okay. And who started it?
This is where it gets interesting. It was apparently a Kuomintang Lieutenant General Kotsi Wang.
A military general. Starting a triad. That's unexpected.
Yeah, not your typical origin story. The initial purpose, according to the sources, was actually political, an anti-communist action group.
Ah, okay. So tied into the Chinese Civil War dynamics.
Exactly. But, history happened. The communists won the Civil War in 1949.
Right.
And so the 14K, or what would become the 14K, had to relocate. They moved to British Hong Kong. And that move, well, that was pretty pivotal. It really marks their shift towards becoming a major criminal organization.
Okay, that makes sense. The move to Hong Kong was key. And the name, 14K, it's pretty memorable. Where does that come from? The sources had a couple of ideas, didn't they?
They did. One theory is the 14 stands for the original 14 Kuomintang members involved, sort of a founding group thing.
Okay.
But maybe a more grounded explanation is geographic. I might refer to the address of an old headquarters. 14 is the road number, and the K just stands for Kowloon.
Kowloon, right. Makes sense. Either way, the name stuck, obviously.
Definitely stuck. It's known worldwide now, unfortunately for the wrong reasons.
Now, you mentioned their shift to crime in Hong Kong. The sources highlight their early involvement in the opium trade as being really significant.
Oh, absolutely critical. You have to think about the context. After the Kuomintang defeat, a lot of their remnants fled south into places like Burma.
Okay.
And that region, Burma, Thailand, Laos, it became the center for opium cultivation, the Golden Triangle.
The Golden Triangle, right. Infamous.
Exactly. And the 14K, with their existing connections, maybe some military discipline still lingering, they saw an opportunity. They basically became the main distributors, setting up smuggling routes out of the Golden Triangle.
So they were pioneers in that specific grim trade.
You could say that, yeah. The sources suggest they were instrumental in building those early drug networks, reaching far beyond Asia. Even then, this wasn't just local stuff.
Wow. And that must have given them the capital and the know-how to expand, right?
Precisely. The drug money funded diversification, and the smuggling experience built their logistical skills for, well, all kinds of other ventures.
Speaking of which, the list of criminal activities in the sources is just staggering. It covers almost everything.
It really does. It's quite the portfolio. Your articles mentioned drug trafficking, obviously still big on heroin and opium.
Still the core.
Seems like it, yeah. But also counterfeiting, illegal gambling, bookmaking, arms trafficking, arson, fraud, human trafficking.
This keeps going.
Oh, yeah. Identity theft, money laundering, extortion, murder, illegal immigration, kidnapping, even hacking now, racketeering, home invasions. It's incredibly broad.
It shows a scary level of adaptability, I guess, whatever makes money.
That seems to be the operating principle.
Yeah.
But it is interesting, as you said, the sources consistently flag drug trafficking as the primary income stream. That's the financial engine.
Okay. So how does an organization this widespread, doing all this stuff, actually function? What's the structure like?
Well, according to the sources, they're huge. Second largest triad globally, apparently. Around 20,000 members.
20,000, wow.
Yeah, spread across maybe 30 different subgroups. And they're the main rivals of the Sun Yan, who are apparently #1 in size.
30 subgroups. Does that mean it's not centrally controlled?
That's the key thing. It's very decentralized, quite flexible, actually. Unlike, say, the Italian Mafia's commission structure, there isn't one single dragonhead boss for the entire 14K worldwide.
No single leader calling all the shots.
Nope. And that lack of central control, the sources suggest, is a big reason why there's so much internal conflict. Factional violence is common because these subgroups often clash.
So it's more like a franchise model almost, or a loose federation under one banner.
It's a pretty good way to put it. A loose federation. They might share the history, the name, maybe some traditions.
Right. The sources mention the traditional triad ranks, like the 489 leader, 426 enforcers.
Yeah, they mentioned that structure, the Sanchu, the Red Poles, White People fans, all those numbers.
Yep.
And the 14K subgroups might use similar titles internally, symbolically.
Symbolically.
Right. But practically speaking, each subgroup seems to run its own show, largely independent of the others. It's this mix of old tradition and, well, modern decentralized crime.
Fascinating. How do they keep getting members? How do they recruit for these 30 subgroups?
The sources point towards targeting young people, often in poorer areas. In Hong Kong, places like Kowloon, Kwantong, Twin Mun come up.
Vulnerable kids.
Seems like it. Sometimes even targeting specific schools, the articles say. And similar tactics are used overseas, like in Asian communities in California, San Francisco, Orange County. Looking for teens there, too.
Grim. And what about women? Are they involved much?
The sources indicate not really. It's described as a very male-dominated society. Women play a pretty small role overall.
Okay. Let's shift to some specific historical moments. The 1956 riots in Hong Kong sound like a really big deal for the 14K.
Oh, huge. A major confrontation with the British colonial government back then. It got very violent. The reports mentioned 60 deaths, over 400 injured.
Wow. What was the fallout?
A massive crackdown. The authorities arrested something like 10,000 suspected 14K members, deported about 600 of them, mostly to Taiwan.
A serious blow.
It was, and it directly led the Hong Kong government to set up the Triad Societies Bureau, a dedicated police unit just to deal with triads. So the riots really put the 14K, and triads in general, firmly on the government's radar in a big way.
Made them take notice. Okay, fast forward a bit to the late 90s. Macau seems to become a major battleground. Something about a figure called Broken Tooth Koi.
Yeah, Macau and the run-up to the handover back to China was apparently pretty wild. The sources talk about Wan Kuok Koi, a.k.a. Broken Tooth Koi. He led a smaller rival group, the Shuifeng Triad.
And he challenged the 14K.
Aggressively. Challenged their dominance in Macau's casinos, the VIP rooms, that sort of thing. It led to a lot of violence. Gang attacks, shootings.
Nasty stuff.
Very. The sources mention a specific incident in 1998, the killing of a Portuguese national at a cafe, widely believed to be linked to this feud with the 14K.
And what happened to Broken Tooth Koi?
His reign didn't last that long, actually. In 1999, he got convicted on a load of charges, loan sharking, illegal gambling, criminal association, and got 15 years in prison.
So he was taken off the board.
Right. His gang was linked to drive-by shootings, car bombs, even assassination attempts, so his imprisonment was a major event. And interestingly, the sources suggest that after this rival was dealt with in Macau, the 14K actually saw a resurgence and started expanding more actively internationally again.
Filling the vacuum, maybe? Or just less heat on them?
Could be a bit of both. But it highlights their resilience, their ability to adapt and push outwards.
Which brings us nicely to their global footprint. It's really quite something, reading through the source materials. Let's start with Africa, South Africa specifically.
Yeah, the sources mention South Africa. Two subgroups, the 14K How and 14KI, are apparently active there. Involved in extortion, but also heavily into abalone trafficking.
Abalone. The shellfish.
Exactly. Highly valuable, especially in Asia. The illegal export of South African abalone just to Hong Kong was supposedly worth, like, US $32 million back in the year 2000 alone.
32 million. Just from shellfish.
Shows you the scale, doesn't it? Exploiting local resources, devastating the environment, and making huge profits through their international networks.
Incredible. Okay, moving over to Asia itself, beyond Hong Kong and Macau, their reach seems extensive there too.
Absolutely. Japan, for instance. Presence reported since the 80s, branches in big cities, potentially thousands of members.
Doing what in Japan?
Things like credit card counterfeiting, also working with the Yakuza, apparently, on smuggling Chinese migrants into Japan.
Okay.
What else in Asia?
There's a really worrying link mentioned to those scam centers in Myanmar. The 14K are named as major financial backers for the Shui Cocoa development, which is heavily associated with online fraud operations.
Financing scam cities. Wow.
Yeah. Then you've got alleged arms smuggling to the Abu Sayyaf group in the Philippines, and even helping launder ransom money for them.
Working with terrorist groups. That's what the intelligence suggests. And in Thailand, they're described as the biggest Chinese syndicate there, deeply into heroin and yaba methamphetamine smuggling, which inevitably leads to turf wars with other gangs in Thailand and Cambodia. So yeah, a major multifaceted presence across Asia.
It really sounds like they're woven into the fabric of organized crime across the continent. What about Europe?
They've been in Europe a long time, too. The Netherlands pops up early, back in the 1970s, initially via Chinese restaurants, apparently.
A classic infiltration method.
Seems so. By the late 80s, Dutch police thought the 14K basically controlled heroin imports into the Benelux countries, with direct lines from Hong Kong via Bangkok.
How do they operate there? Big gangs.
More like small, separate cells, the sources suggest, using the Netherlands as a hub to distribute heroin elsewhere in Europe. Belgium has also become really important, possibly even moving heroin labs there to Flanders. And they're said to control illegal gambling in Antwerp.
So Benelux is key. What about other European countries?
France, they're listed among the top triads, working with other groups on heroin trafficking. Ireland saw triad activity, potentially 14K related, back in '79, involving deadly fights over protection rackets. More recently, links to trafficking women and children into Ireland, plus money laundering.
And the UK.
The UK was apparently the first place they set up shop in Europe. They operate independently in big cities, London, Birmingham, Liverpool, Manchester, known for turf wars with rivals like Woshing Wo, also involved in people smuggling, cigarette smuggling. Pretty diversified there, too.
A significant footprint across Europe, then. Let's cross the Atlantic, North America, Canada, Mexico, the U.S., all mentioned in the sources.
Definitely. Canada's been a major base since the mid-'70s, especially Toronto. Started with Hong Kong members, but later recruited from the Vietnamese community, even absorbed other smaller gangs like the Ghost Shadows.
What are their main activities in Canada?
Heroin trafficking again, migrant smuggling, theft, extortion. And there are links mentioned to the big Sam Gore Syndicate, which itself has Canadian ties.
And Mexico. That's an interesting connection.
Yeah, the intelligence suggests the 14K might be supplying precursor chemicals, the raw materials for making meth, to the Sinaloa cartel down in Mexico.
So connecting Asian organized crime with Mexican cartels, that's a powerful link.
A very worrying one, yeah. And in the U.S., they have a presence in the usual major cities, New York, L.A., Chicago, Boston, Houston, often working with other local triads or gangs like Ping An or Huaqing.
Any specific cases stand out in the U.S.?
The sources highlight one figure, Hui Sin Ma, also known as Frank Ma. He apparently rose to be a real powerhouse, almost a godfather figure for the 14K in the U.S., involved in all sorts of crime before he eventually got caught and received a life sentence.
Frank Ma shows how individuals can still gain a lot of power, even in that decentralized setup.
Exactly. It shows the potential for influential figures to emerge within specific territories.
Okay, finally, let's look south to Oceania, Australia, and New Zealand.
They're active there, too. In Australia, they're flagged as one of the main groups behind meth trafficking. Big market, big profits.
And New Zealand.
Law enforcement there apparently considers the 14K the most powerful Asian crime group in the country, heavily involved in importing pseudoephedrine, the key meth precursor, and then selling it onto local gangs who do the actual cooking.
So controlling the supply chain at a crucial point?
Seems to be their strategy there. They were also allegedly involved in a major kidnapping case in Auckland back in 2008, so serious violent crime capacity there as well.
It's just the sheer geographical spread is mind-boggling. They're literally everywhere.
It really demonstrates their adaptability, finding criminal niches all over the world.
And as we talked about earlier, this massive, sprawling network exists without that central command, which, you noted, leads to problems internally.
But just to circle back on that, the lack of a single universally obeyed leader means these different subgroups often end up fighting each other over territory, over specific rackets, over influence. So that internal factional violence is a pretty constant feature, according to the sources.
Okay, so let's try and wrap this up. We've seen the 14K emerge from the political chaos of post-war China.
Yeah, with that unusual military connection at the start.
And grow into this absolutely vast global criminal empire, involved in, well, almost everything illegal you can think of across nearly every continent.
With drug trafficking, especially heroin, still seeming to be the financial bedrock.
And structured in this really decentralized way, which helps them adapt and survive locally, but also fuels internal conflict. Their impact on global organized crime is just undeniable.
It really is. Which kind of leaves us with a final thought maybe for you, the listener, to mull over.
Yeah.
Well, given this group's long history, its political roots, its proven ability to adapt to massive global changes over, 70, 80 years, what does the continued existence and evolution of something like the 14K tell us about the future of transnational organized crime? And maybe more pointedly, what does it say about the challenges governments and law enforcement face in trying to effectively tackle an organization that's so widespread, so adaptable, and internally so fragmented?
That's a heavy question. How do you fight something that's everywhere and nowhere specific at the same time?
Exactly. It's a complex problem with no easy answers. Definitely something to think about long after this deep dive ends.